Hey guys, Jaryd Krause, host of the Buying Online Businesses podcast. And today I get to speak to Mads Singers, who is a team building management gun. He's worked with teams from Shell and Coca-Cola all the way down to smaller companies and entrepreneurs building small little virtual teams for the websites that they actually buy. He's also worked with large corporations like Xero and IBM. Now, in this episode, Mads and I talk about how to identify our virtual team's profile and hire based on their profiles and give them the correct jobs and work they actually love to do to help our business thrive with the tasks that they do as virtual assistants and workers. We also talk about how to be managing our staff correctly to get the most from them and to prevent micromanaging, which is something that we all need to do as entrepreneurs. We also talk about how to be a leader in your team and how to have your team grow to a certain level that your team and your business can surpass you and not need you, and you can have a seamless business that runs without you. So if you're looking to buy a website business and build a virtual team, or buy a business with a virtual team, this is certainly an episode that you don't want to miss. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Buying Online Businesses podcast. And today I get to speak with Mads Singers. Now, obviously in the intro, you heard all about his accolades and how well he's been going and helping people with teams. And this is a huge thing that I find, and we're just talking before we hit the record buttons, Mads, about people on the online space just not like getting some success, but not having any clue on what to do with teams. And I myself, when I first started up, I put my hand up as well. I'm still learning, and I'm always going to be a student here. So I'm so grateful that you come on the show, and welcome to the show, Mads.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much for having me. So just to add a point to that. So obviously I've gone a very different route, right? I literally started out when I was 18 and pretty much dove into management straight away, right? And that have given me a very different perspective on entrepreneurship, right? Like I'm just about to start my fourth business now, and the first three are running well, and again I'm able to do that because of my management background, right? So a lot of people is like, yeah, they often look at it a bit like a mystery, right? But the thing is, when you learn to build great teams, when you learn to make things happen, like, it's wonderful. First and foremost, like it's so nice to build sustainable teams that can run businesses by themselves, and that there's nothing I enjoy personally more than when I step away from a business and it just keeps growing and getting better than when I was there. Because reality is, as founders, like most of the time, what happens is we are actually holding the business back, because we end up being this sort of, we want to do everything, we want to make every decision and all that sort of stuff. Whereas when you really let the business go, like very, very consistently, you'll see some big growth, right?
Yeah, I've actually read about that and heard about that too. When people are trying so hard to grow their business and they've got a team and they're pushing their team and they're trying to get everything working so productively, like let's just get rid of all these obstacles out of the way and try and make this super seamless. But there's one thing that's in the way that they're not seeing sometimes, and it's the obstacle. And if they can take themselves out of the way, then it can grow seamlessly. I know people, I got great friends with teams that just they run themselves, and it's like a self-fulfilling pudding, really. Like it's, and that's something that I would love to just dig into today. So you started when you were 18, did you? And
Yeah, so I started working when I was 18, and pretty much, I mean, within a few months after I turned 18, I was very, very certain that that management was what I wanted to do. And basically at that point I started studying it pretty relentlessly. So I've gotten, yeah, nearly 18 years of experience now. And yeah, it's what I live and breathe. So yeah.
Yeah, and you've done so much with so many great companies. And I guess what, coming back to getting into management, is some people, you said earlier before we hit the record button, some people don't even have a good manager in front of them. and they can't even learn from that. And that was me and myself. Is when I started to step into a supervisor role. I used to be a plumber, Mads, and I stepped into a supervisor role, and the person above me was just disgusting at their job, and in a sense that there was no support and no communication. And this is so everybody that's listening to this in a corporate job, it's probably just like Groundhog Day. They're probably in the same boat here. But my suggestion when people do have they move to being an entrepreneur themselves is like what I learned was to what not to do and do the opposite of that. So radical communication, radical support.
Yeah, I mean, I generally have this philosophy that no one goes to work to do a bad job. Like, I don't know any human beings that wake up in the morning and like, I want to do a crap job today, right? Like, I don't know them. I mean, they might be out there, but I don't know them, right?
Yeah.
So one of the things, even with large companies that I work with, is education of managers, right? Like, because even in small businesses, one of the big challenges, and by the way, this goes to companies the size of IBM, right? Like one of the key things is when you move from an individual contributor role to a manager role, it's kind of like expected. You wake up the next day and you have a new skill set in your suitcase, right? And that's just not the case. And unfortunately, small and large companies simply don't invest enough. Like I see so many companies that buy the latest e-commerce course and latest SEO course, but they don't buy their managers like management material to learn, right? And that's like one of the key things that really make a big difference both for me and for my clients. Like I put together a course which I call the 80-20 of management, right? Which was very much aimed to close that gap. But just generally, like the whole fundamental is that when you give people more responsibility, when you make them a manager, invest in them, right? Don't just sit on, because the problem is when you give someone the manager hat, the last thing they want to do is saying, hey boss, I kind of don't know what I'm doing, right? They want to seem confident, they want to look like they have control, but they don't. And if you as the manager don't step up and give them support and give them learning, like they're not going to do fantastically. Like some people will get over it and some people will be decent, but just like any other skill, you can do a ton of stuff with a little bit of learning and a little bit of knowledge.
Yeah, that's great. And to touch on that, like I've noticed that with like I went into radical communication and radical support with my team at some stage. Is there a tipping point where you go too much and you give them too not too much responsibility, but you give them too much communication and too much support to a sense that they're not really taking responsibility and you can't step away from the business as you would? Is there a tipping point there?
So the challenge is too much support often turns out to be micromanagement.
Yeah.
Right. So when you say too much support, like too much support is really being available. And yeah, sometimes I love removing availability occasionally, right? And force people into it. One of the key things that I think works really well, um, many managers, they love answering questions. When people come to them, they feel important and they're like, yeah, I can answer that question. I'm really smart, right? And a lot of entrepreneurs, particularly in the tech space, they like that feeling. But one of the key things, if you want the, like when you hire staff, they start up under you, and your goal is to try and bring them up to your level, right? Or like at least in what it is they specialize in. But what many people do, because they keep answering the questions, what happens is they become much better because they know all the answers, but the staff is not growing as fast. And one of the key things that I try and do that really help that is whenever people come to you with a question or a problem, always ask them, one, to have suggestions for what could be done, right? So like you have a problem with a customer, what do you see being the solutions or the potential solutions? And out of those potential solutions, which one do you feel is the right one, right? Because if your staff come to you with that up front, then what happens is instead of just answering the question, they actually get to think about it. And it's not about actually, it's not really about, for me at least, it's not about them making the right decision. It's
Mm.
about me understanding how do they think and how did they get to the decision they made. And if I feel it's like generally, I don't really tell people to do something different unless they're literally about to bring down the business, right? Because reality is, in most cases, as business managers, we love to think we know everything and we are the best, right? But
Yeah.
reality is, very frequently we don't. And often the other way works just as well, right? So very, very often I've been like, oh, this guy is doing something that's totally silly. I'll let him do it to figure out his mistake. But he comes back and he has a much better result than I would have gotten, right?
Yeah.
So
And
a
it's
lot of
also
the time,
it's also a, you kill two birds with one stone type thing, in the sense that you empower them as well, I guess, with like, you give them that little bit of responsibility to be creative, and then go, oh, like, wow, once they've done that and it worked, and they could see like, wow, I've done this, that just, it builds that momentum, I see. And I've tried to implement that in my business, and I'm still getting there. I'm still growing.
yeah.
And I wanted to ask, Mads, like, I know teams come to you, like big corporates and stuff like that. They come to you and like, please help us. We need some serious help here. And then you've also got other people that you work in the space, in the online space, with like VR.
Yeah, actually, my primary client base right now is smaller businesses, right? And
Yeah.
that's because it's just so much more fun. Like, again, when you walk into a large company, right, one of the key challenges is that, people are like, oh, great, I have a 3-hour break here, right? Whereas when you work with entrepreneurs or smaller companies that just have a totally different motivation, all right?
Yeah.
And as a coach, it's just so much more fun, right? Like, even though it doesn't pay nearly as good, it's much more fun when you see things move. Like, it's not like you
Yeah.
work with a couple of managers in Shell and suddenly you see the company explode, right?
Yeah.
Whereas when you work with small entrepreneurs, like literally, I worked with a client in the beginning, right? And he started out, when I met him, he was about 30 people and he had been for 2 years. Within 3.5, 4 months of me working with him, they went from 30 to 90 people, right? Like,
Amazing.
it was
Wow.
like exponential growth. But and it was this case, like, they had a bunch of managers, but there was a few things that was just not done right. And as soon as they got a little bit, like, I work with them literally, we're talking days, like 2-3 days or something,
Wow.
over two different visits, right? And that made such a huge difference, right? So it is really that sort of learning, and also the sort of trust. Like, people love when you invest in them, right? Like, they love when you try and upskill them and show them, hey, I believe in you and all that stuff. So
Yeah, it's an act of love. You believe in them, you want to empower them, you want them to grow. Like, they see that the business isn't just about that person that's running it; it's about the team as well, and that's huge. Like,
exactly.
indirectly showing them through action how important the team is. So, coming back to you going from, not like most of your clients being in the virtual space and online businesses. Now, people that are listening to this, is they're buying website businesses, right? And some of them are buying them with small teams, and some are like buying them and wanting to build a small team. So for those who are in that position and they want to make sure their team's really good, or want to tweak some things, what are some of the things that you'd first sort of look at doing with them, or some of the things that they could do prior to working with you or themselves?
Yeah. So, full disclosure, I've definitely done my bit of buying websites and selling websites.
Oh,
So
awesome. I didn't even know that. That's awesome. Congrats on that. That's great.
totally in the space as well. So,
Yeah.
what I normally do. So one of the key things I focus on, and it takes a little bit of time to go through, right? But basically, I love people and behaviors. So I use a model called DISC, that I also teach in my course. And the benefit with that, like, a lot of people know, like, Myers-Briggs and things like
Yeah.
that, right? The challenge with that is often it's like, hey, take this test and I'll tell you who you are, which is kind of like, one, most people don't know themselves that well, and
Yeah.
two, they often answer what they think you want to hear, right? Which kind of makes tests pretty useless.
Yeah.
The one thing that DISC does very different is it makes it very, very easy to, by looking at people's emails and the likes, you can actually see the personality from that point of view. And I use that, like when I take over teams, like that's the first thing I do. I try and figure out what's the personality of different people and are they actually in the right roles, right?
Yeah.
Like for yourself, for example, if I would take over a company and I saw you sitting in a sales role, I would probably get a little bit concerned, right? Not because you couldn't sell, but because it would not be your natural strength,
Okay.
right? Whereas in similar situations with other, like you see people sitting working all day with Excel sheets, and it's definitely not something they're particularly good at or particularly enjoy. So for me, the key thing with having staff and figuring out the staff is really figuring out what is it they're best at, right? Because the thing is, when you're doing things, like most entrepreneurs are doing things they love doing. And that's why they end up working so much, because they love doing it. Right? If you can do the same thing to your staff, if you can pinpoint things that they love doing and get them to do stuff they love doing instead of stuff they
have to,
don't love doing
want
so
to.
much. Exactly. Right. And that's really what I always try. Like sometimes if you take over a business, sometimes that's not possible, right? But in most cases, that's how I try and build teams, and that's how I try and motivate teams, right? And really making sure people are in the right slots and are in the right spaces and doing the right things. So that's the first thing I do if I go into a new business, or even if I work with clients, like trying to figure out is the right pieces in the right places.
And with those online businesses, a lot of the way they kind of scale and grow and hiring VAs and then getting them on board as full-time staff is they find them as contractors or, virtual assistants that are just doing a little bit of work at the start. And then they come in and they bring them on board doing the same role because they need them more often. Now, do you find that say I hire somebody to do some work, I'm like, oh, that was really good. And then I want to keep them on and I bring them on my team. Do you find that often the case is with them that they're just doing that role because that's what they had learnt to do and it's not actually what they love? Or do you find the opposite way around, that they actually love to do it, which is why they've kind of excelled in it?
It depends a little bit about the personalities. So generally people who are very salesy, for example, can sell themselves into many different jobs.
Yeah.
And the problem is often because most people are not very good at interviewing, if you're good at bullshitting, you can bullshit your way through to a lot of jobs. That doesn't necessarily mean you like the jobs or good at them, but you can. Like, if, for example, if most salespeople, you would never see them in a role as an accountant. But the thing is, in most cases, if they walk into an interview for an accountant's role, if they're desperate for a job, they can very often bullshit their way through it. And then when they get to the actual job and don't understand numbers and can't look at spreadsheets and stuff, then reality sort of wakes up, right? But for me, that's like that's one of the fundamentals. But a lot of the time, people are naturally attracted to things that works for them. But it's very different, like what the status is in different businesses, right?
Yeah. And so what are some of the steps you would find to seeing what that person's personality is? You mentioned a little bit about looking at their emails and stuff like that. So say I've got a team or somebody listening's got a small team and they want to go, all right, I want to just really know their personalities and find out what it is they love. Would you go to them and say, hey, like, what are your favorite tasks that you do in this role? And what are the least favorite? And then get all those tasks and then distribute them to people who are preferred in those tasks? Like, what is the process
I
of that?
try and look at it a little bit different, right? So just to sort of cover that, there's 4 sort of natural personality types, right?
Yeah.
You have sort of the first one, what DISC is called Ds. They're very, very driven, very motivated. They're very like, let's get stuff done, right? They're typical sort of go-getters, and
That's
they're naturally very egocentric, which is okay. That's how they are, and that's how they achieve the results they do. And they're often not very sort of people friendly, right? They're often like when you look at a lot of the top sports stars, they're super laser focused. They're on their game, right?
Yeah.
And that's sort of the D's. Then you have the I's, which are the sort of typical sales people, always talking, always, they like meetings, sitting around circles and just talking and blabbing. And, every time someone tells a story, they tell a story 10% better, and they always want to be the center of attention, right? The typical guy that walks around in an orange suit or something like that. Attention, right? And then you have the S's, which are a lot more like sort of the mom or the dad of the team that's like, hey, everyone okay, let's sit down in a circle, let's have cake Friday, and let's is everyone okay, everyone always looking out for each other. Mm-hmm. And then you have the C's, which are the sort of nerdy perfectionist, staring at the computer all day every day kind of thing. And that's sort of high level, the 4 personality types, right? And the way I tend to try and do it is you want people doing things that kind of fit their natural tendencies, right? So if you have people that are naturally people focused, trying to get them into roles where they work with people either externally or internally gives them significantly more pleasure, right? Whereas people, like for example, a developer, like when you look at developers, a developer can make a great accountant because it's the same thing. It's logical mindset. It's numbers. It's all that stuff, right? So those kind of people are interchangeable, but that's the sort of stuff you want them to do, right? Like if you have a developer with spare time, like don't get him to sit and do cold calls for sales, right? It's the wrong thing. But you want them to be doing things that are like logical. It can be explorational, but very often they will take a lot longer to learn. But when they learn it, they do it really well, right? So it's more like a more look at the personality type and see what is that's needed in these different roles. For example, we in the outsourcing business I own, we do a lot of outreach for various clients, and we do a lot of customer support, and that generally appeals very much to people who are people focused, right? And that's a great appeal. And at the same time, we also do a ton of like research and data analysis and stuff like that, which on the other hand is much more sort of a task focused thing. So that's really high level how I normally look at it. Definitely you can also ask people what they like doing. Mm-hmm. One of the things I've always found though is people don't know what they don't know. So they might have had tasks they say, oh, I don't like doing this thing, and that's okay. But very often it's hard for them. Like business owners know their whole business, right? And very often they expect the staff to understand it, and they expect staff to say, oh, I want to do this thing up here. But the thing is, they don't know. Like they know the 2 tasks you have given them in the past, right? They don't know other stuff. So it's hard for them to say, oh, I want to try and do this thing or whatever, right? So a lot of the time as a business owner, for me, the key thing is get a good feel for the individual and really learn how to push them to do better stuff and do more stuff, right?
That's great. And so I'm huge on, I've just got it tapping into finding your flow as an entrepreneur and as a person. I don't know if that's some of the stuff you like. Obviously the disc profiling is like probably just the start of that. But there's this really good book that I've just read. It's by Roger Hamilton. It's called Your Life, Your Legacy. Have you heard of it?
Yep, definitely.
Yeah, and it's just so good to see that it's based on people's entrepreneurial traits. But I dare say, and I really believe that those traits show up in people's personalities overall. And if you can tap into that personality type, then you can really find flow in, even if you're not being an entrepreneur, but in your job and in your work and what you do. And I really think like the Myers-Briggs and all that sort of stuff and the disc profile. I mean, the Myers-Briggs, I don't know if you use that as heavily, but definitely the disc profiling. So would you suggest people are hiring based on the disc profiling as well? And if they've already got a team, sort of get the team to do some of that, and then they get data and then make decisions based on that?
Yeah, I mean, again, like the key thing I like in my course, like I really go through it and really teach people how to read other individuals themselves, right? Like for me, that's personally, that's the one thing that makes the biggest change in management. Like when I work corporate, like that was the one thing that, one, helped me survive, but two, helped me be effective, right? Because normally people are effective with other people that are like themselves. But people who are different from themselves, like if, for example, if you're a developer yourself and you're hiring sales guys, it's difficult as hell.
Yeah.
Other side, if you're a sales guy and you're trying to hire developers, it's difficult, right? And if you don't know how to work with those individuals, it's really, really difficult. Or even, it's actually more if you don't understand how they think, right? The key thing that really opened up when I learned this was like, so often I used to say, why would anyone do this? like, do you want a lot of money? Yes or no? No. Like, why would anyone do that? Right?
Yeah.
But when you learn to see how other people think and how their mind works, it really helps you understand much better how other people make decisions and therefore understand their way of thinking much, much better. Right?
Mm. I got a mentor who calls it hares, owls, tortoises, and squirrels. I'm not sure you've heard that, the HOTS. And
Yeah.
and then he introduced me to the Roger Hamilton book. And upon doing some seminars and some of his training and with other people, you start to pick up, because he helps you build a team as well. You start to pick up on other people's profiles, and you can quite clearly see that where I lack, I need to get. It's like I'm very much a turbocharged hare, right? Like a D.
Yeah.
And on my team, like obviously I'm just going to lack at being like a squirrel or a turtle, and I just can't like I'm the guy that'd be like, why would somebody do something that way or that slow?
Yeah.
But it's important because I'm going to run off a cliff chasing the dream if I don't have people like tortoises, and and squirrels holding me on the ground and checking everything that I'm not going to trip over. And the same with the disc profiling. I need that C type in my team as well. Yeah. So that's a huge thing that I'm glad you touched on that, because would you say for somebody having a team or learning to build a team, that would be a go-to project of learning the different profilings and how to, I wouldn't say just understand people?
Yeah, understand people. Yeah, I mean, honestly, it's the first module of my course, and I feel it's that important, right? And it's both that important in business, but also in personal life, right? Like I see so many people constantly battling with relationships and so on, and it just when you learn it, it really opens your eyes, and when you get used to that, like. Well, for me, when someone sits down next to me in an airplane, I can generally tell them things about themselves they don't know, right? Like that's like when you get really good at that stuff, like it's simple enough, like it's not difficult, like it's reading things such as like the volume of people's voice, the amount of smiling they do, the amount of eye contact they do, like those kind of things. So it's not difficult to do, but you need to know what you're looking for and how, right? But when like it took me about a year where I spent a good bit of time sort of training it, but then after that it just happens subconsciously, right? And you don't even need to think about it anymore. So it is really, really powerful tool. But yeah, for me the fundamental really, I mean, it comes down to communication, right? Communication as human beings is so incredibly important, right? And like if I'm writing to you and I write a mail like this, you probably won't read it, right? Like literally, I mean, we haven't known each other very, very long. So literally from the first 1 or 2 emails I saw from you, like I knew how to write to you, right? I knew that if I sent you a big wall of text, you wouldn't read it. And the ability to understand people like that is just really, really important, right? Both when you communicate to employees, when you communicate to potential customers. Like I've trained sales teams in Disc, and it makes such a big difference, right? So yeah.
Yeah, that's great. And so you've bought businesses before as well. And have you bought businesses with teams? And what was some of and if not?
No, not. I mean, 2 VAs, I think is the maximum I've bought a. Yeah.
And what did you learn in that process when you bought a business with the VAs? Like, was there any, like your skills came into play, and did that help you grow the business in a way?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, like I've been used to it when I worked in IBM particularly, right? What happened was you'd literally have one team and be moved over to a total different team in a total different place, right? So I got very, very used to sort of waking up one morning and having 20 new people around me or 100 new people around me, right? So you kind of get used to that. I would say my purchase experience specifically probably haven't taught me a ton in that area. But what I would say is it's always like the same when I go and coach clients, it's always interesting to see how people do things differently. Sometimes like I pick up great things as well. Like, sometimes people have a great way of incentivizing their staff, or they've thought of something that just it's a bit out of the box, but it's a really great idea. And again, that's really cool, right?
Yeah. I own a business. I bought a business and I had two VAs, and one just wasn't really needed. And the other person was more so. And he was able to pick up the task that other person wasn't, and quite seamlessly. And when I bought it, I knew nothing about the business. So everybody that listens, they know that you buy a business and you get a little bit of training from the seller. And I got that. But everything that I learned from the business was from this VA. And the VA pretty much runs the business. And I don't come in and I'm trying my best at very at the start, because this is when I'm like just starting out being an entrepreneur and an investor. I'm trying my very best not to micromanage and change things too much, because they know how to do the process seamlessly. So talking about micromanaging, what are some of the ways that we can prevent ourselves? Because this is so, like, it's been hard for me. And I know a lot of entrepreneurs, they have their business and they don't want it to break, and they don't want anything bad to happen. So they're just making sure everything's in the perfect spot. And that can be micromanaging and frustrating for the VAs. What are some of the ways that people can prevent themselves from doing this atrocious task?
So one of the key questions I always ask, and I love asking it, is if you had 10 businesses that was running at 90% of what the current is, or you have one business that run at 100%, what would be worth more, right? And fundamentally, that is the question you ask when you're delegating and when you're trying to micromanage, right? Like fundamentally, the problem is when you're spending your time focusing on like I look at it as a pyramid, right?
Yep.
You want to be doing things in the company that's worth more money and that help the company grow more. If you're looking at granular stuff in the bottom, which is worth nothing per hour, and you're trying to fix small things that's a $2 or $3 an hour thing, you're wasting significantly company resources, right? Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying don't train people and don't help people get off the ground, but most people, it comes back to our need as human beings, right? We like fixing problems. We like feeling, oh yeah, I fixed this thing. It makes me feel good. We like having work. Like we actually like feeling busy. So we like when like as a business owner, the last thing people want to do is they want to sit down and think about strategy and do a 2-year vision and stuff like that. It's much more fun to start looking in your mailbox and answering some things and feeling productive and busy, right? And that's exactly the difference between a successful entrepreneur and someone who ends up doing a lot of work and not growing a lot, right? And that's where micromanagement kind of comes into the picture, because people who like doing that, like getting stuff done, rather than actually looking for efficiency, looking for what's the most important thing I can do right now to move this business forward. They are often the people that end up in these situations and severely micromanaging staff, right? And constantly like, oh no, you shouldn't have done that. You should have done that. And like I had a guy who he run a team of 5 VAs doing customer service. He would literally sit and check every single reply these 5 people were doing every single day, and he have had them working for him for the last one was at least a year.
Oh, that's insane.
Every single day after work, he would sit and check every reply, and he would send them these angry feedbacks if anything was like out of what he felt was placed, right? And I'm like, great, go get a life.
It's just crazy because you're like at the bottom of the pyramid, like you say. It's just not helping the team grow, because you should be focusing on that task where you can bring more clients in, but you're spending that time on something insane.
Yeah.
That's not getting, somebody used to tell me, it was like, is it an income producing task? If it's not, why are you doing it?
Yeah, I would say as a business owner, it's not always income producing, right? Like things like, for example, setting up company values and doing strategy and doing longer term planning and stuff is really important, right? But honestly, most entrepreneurs rarely get to that point, right? Like most entrepreneurs really get caught up in the business, in the day to day, in this sort of feeling busy, right? And that's majority of the things I do as a coach is really helping people step up to that level, right? And then getting them out of the business and getting them out of that sort of rat race mentality.
Yeah. So it's really coming back to that profiling and making sure they're doing the right tasks, really, isn't it?
And also as a business owner, like you want to figure out what is it that's your core strength as well. Because a lot of people are like, oh, I'm a business owner, I should be doing these things. But the whole point is if that's not your strength, like if you're not good at spreadsheets and numbers, get someone else to do your freaking accounting, right? Like again, so many people they spend a lot of time doing small things that they're not good at. And the whole fundamental for me is effectiveness is really about figuring out what's your key strength, where do you add the most value, and where can you make that biggest impact, right? Because wherever that is, um, the more you can utilize yourself, and the more fun it is, and the better you feel. Like if you've been, I mean, even people who are good at numbers, they hate doing their tax, right? But if you spend 3 days sitting doing your tax and you hate your life out of it, like it's not a good place to be, right? And you can pay other people to do it for sensible money. Whereas if you spend your time actually getting new client, getting new business, you can make that back many folds. And it's not just the days it takes to do it. It's the 3 months prior to it where you keep thinking about it every day and like, oh yeah, I have to do this thing, where you're constantly filling up your mind with these negative, like, oh, I hate that crap, right?
You really need to protect that. Those it's just that comes back to the think and grow rich type. Like you've got to really be careful with your outputs and the thoughts that you have, but also realize that when you do go away, like say for me, accounting, it's like not something that I am good at. It's not something I want to do. I'm going to hate it. I'm going to bring up those thoughts like, oh, I've got to get to this task. I'll put it off, and I keep putting it off. But also when I do finally come to that task and I just want to get it done, it's going to take me longer and probably cost me more than it would be to get somebody else to do it anyway. So I think that's a really good thing that people take note of and wrap up this podcast is that, like, guys, if you're listening to this and you're buying a business, whether it has a team or not, you're going to build it, is like work out what you're really good at and then work out what everybody else is really good at according to their profiles. And I just want to say thanks so much for jumping on, Mads. I really do appreciate you coming on and sharing your wisdom. And for everybody listening as well, like, and you probably know this too, Mads, when you buy a business, you can't just be thinking about or when you come to buy a website, you can't just be thinking about, all right, I'm just going to manage myself well and this team well. Before you get to that stage, you don't want to buy a bad business, right? You want to buy something that's going to be a lot easier. And we didn't talk about due diligence or anything in this process, which is a big thing that you need to go through first. And part of your due diligence could be speaking to the team and could be working out what tasks need to be done by your VA and how that could look. So this is stuff that I help people with in my community. And I want to give people that are listening to this some free tools to do that due diligence as well. So just go to my site, buyingonlinebusiness.com/free resources, and you guys can get that due diligence framework and a website evaluator tool. And it's going to tie into everything we talked about here in making sure you buy a good business, which does make it a lot easier to run a team and run yourself. So thanks again. Where can people find out more about you and your course and everything you do, Mads?
Yeah, so madssingers.com, MADSSINGERS.com. That's my main portal. My outsourcing business as well is aristosourcing.com, and that's sort of the sort of two main businesses that I spend the most time on, at least. So
excellent. Yeah. I'll get those in the show notes. And for everybody that is listening as well, like, thanks for listening to the show. Like, I really appreciate it. If you did like this episode, please go away and subscribe so you don't miss any further episodes. But when you do that as well, please leave a review so I can find out what feedback you have about this show and some other shows, so I can bring more amazing guests to the show and just get this building and make it even better. So thanks, guys, and I'll speak to you soon.